From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now! We're broadcasting from Cancun, Mexico. It's Climate Countdown.
UN starts Civil Society! UN starts Silent State Civil Society!
I think it's a sign of an undemocratic process that we're seeing. What is the UNFCCC afraid of?
Pueblo, escucha y únete a la lucha. We're marching today through the streets of Cancun to call out the governments of the world and their failure to adequately address the global climate crisis.
Protests grow against the UN Climate Summit. Several thousand marchers take to the streets of Cancun to call for climate justice. We'll go inside and outside the talks, and we'll hear from the small Pacific island nation of Nauru. But first, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been denied bail in Britain. We'll speak with his lawyer. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from the U.S. climate change talks in Cancun, Mexico. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been denied bail following his arrest in London on an international warrant to face sexual crime allegations in Sweden. Assange will remain in custody until at least December 14th, when a British court will take up a Swedish request for extradition. Assange has not been charged with a crime, but is wanted for questioning on allegations of unlawful sexual contact with two women. Assange has maintained his innocence and called the case a political witch hunt that has intensified with the group's release of secret U.S. diplomatic cables. The refusal to grant him bail came as more pressure was brought on companies to sever their ties with WikiLeaks. MasterCard and Visa have now suspended the payment of donations to the website. The New York Times is reporting the Justice Department is considering ways to indict Julian Assange beyond the Espionage Act. Other possible offenses being considered include conspiracy or trafficking in stolen property. Assange's attorney, Mark Stevens, said he has yet to see any of the evidence against his client.
We have heard the judge today say that he wishes to see the evidence himself. I think he was impressed by the fact that a number of people were prepared to stand up on behalf of Mr. Assange and prefer his innocence. In those circumstances, I think we will see another bail application, and they were but the tip of an iceberg. This is going to go viral. Many people will come forward to stand as sureties for Mr. Assange. Many people believe Mr. Assange to be innocent, myself included, and many people believe that this prosecution is politically motivated.
We'll speak with another of Assange's attorneys after headlines. A new analysis shows that the wealthiest Americans will receive the most benefit from President Obama's controversial fiscal deal with Republicans. This week, Obama agreed to extend the Bush-era tax cut for the wealthiest Americans and reduce the estate tax in return for a 13-month extension of jobless benefits and a handful of tax credits for low and moderate-income Americans. According to the New York Times, at least a quarter of the tax savings under the deal will go to the wealthiest 1% of the population. The plan's $900 billion cost will be added to the federal deficit, not made up through spending cuts or the closing of loopholes that have taxed capital gains and dividends at just 15%. By contrast, the only group that will see its taxes increase are the nation's lowest-paid workers, individuals who make less than $20,000 and families with earnings below $40,000 stand to see tax hikes because Obama agreed to eliminate his Making Work Pay credit, which provided up to $400 for individuals and $800 for families of low and moderate income. Speaking at the White House, President Obama rejected Democratic criticism of the plan, saying he's forced to compromise.
I've said before that I felt that the middle-class tax cuts were being held hostage to the high-end tax cuts. I think it's tempting not to negotiate with hostage takers unless the hostage gets harmed. Then people will question the wisdom of that strategy. In this case, the hostage was the American people, and I was not willing to see them get harmed.
Vice President Joe Biden met with Democratic senators on Tuesday in an effort to win support for the deal. Independent Senator Bernie Sanders has indicated he'll attempt a filibuster to block its passage. Assessing the plan, Ann Mathias, an analyst with the brokerage giant MF Global, said, quote, "It's going to look like the rich are getting richer again." A federal court has dismissed a lawsuit challenging the Obama administration's authorization of the assassination of U.S. citizens accused of terrorism links abroad. The Center for Constitutional Rights and the American Civil Liberties Union had filed the case on behalf of the father of the Yemen-based Muslim cleric Anwar al-Awlaki, who is said to be the first U.S. citizen added to a CIA list of targets for capture or killing. On Tuesday, Judge John Bates tossed the case on jurisdictional grounds, ruling al-Awlaki's father does not have legal standing to bring a case concerning his son. But Bates said the case raises serious judicial questions, including, quote, how is it that judicial approval is required when the U.S. decides to target a U.S. citizen overseas for electronic surveillance, but not when the United States decides to target a U.S. citizen overseas for death? In a statement, the ACLU said, quote, we continue to believe that the government's power to use lethal force against American citizens should be subject to meaningful oversight by the courts. The Obama administration says it's withdrawing an offer of sweeping incentives to Israel in return for a limited settlement freeze in the occupied West Bank. Israel was reportedly promised 20 advanced F-35 warplanes worth around $3 billion and a U.S. pledge to veto UN resolutions deemed hostile to Israeli policies. Israel would have been free to continue building settlements in occupied East Jerusalem and then throughout the West Bank after just 90 days. Israel reportedly rejected a similar offer in September out of a blanket refusal to stop any settlement expansion, but revived negotiations last month. Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak says the latest talks were sidelined following the WikiLeaks release of diplomatic cables and the crisis in the Korean Peninsula. In Washington, State Department spokesperson P.J. Crowley gave few details on why the administration had dropped the plan.
We thought for a period of time that the moratorium and then a resumption of the moratorium might be the best mechanism to advance a meaningful and sustained dialogue between the parties. We've come to the conclusion that that is not, the best basis to move forward. We will have further conversations on the substance, with the parties, and we'll continue to try to find ways to create the kind of confidence that will eventually, we hope, allow them to engage directly.
Palestinians and critics of the Obama administration's Mideast policy had widely denounced the incentives. This week, the linguist and political analyst Noam Chomsky wrote, quote, Washington's pathetic capitulation to Israel while pleading for a meaningless 3-month settlement freeze should go down as one of the most humiliating moments in U.S. diplomatic history. If you'd like to see a full interview with Noam Chomsky, you can go to our website at democracynow.org. Haiti's controversial presidential election is headed to a runoff vote between government-backed candidate Jude Celestin and former First Lady Mirlande Manigat. On Tuesday, Haitian election officials said Celestin had slightly edged the Haitian musician Michel Martelly to advance to the second round. Supporters of Martelly rallied in the streets of Port-au-Prince in the latest protest against the vote. 12 of the initial 18 candidates have called for the vote's annulment. In other news from Haiti, a new study has backed speculation that Nepalese troops with the UN force were inadvertently responsible for the recent cholera outbreak that's killed over 2,000 people. French epidemiologist Renaud Parot says the most likely explanation for the outbreak is the contamination of Haiti's Artibonite River by the Nepalese troops' base. International negotiations on Iran's nuclear program have concluded with an agreement to continue talks next month. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton met with Iranian officials in Geneva on behalf of the U.S., Russia, China, Britain, France, and Germany. Ashton said the two sides will reconvene in Turkey.
Recognize Iran's rights, but insist that it fulfills its obligations. We are ready to address and to seek common ground also on other issues of mutual interest. we and Iran agreed to a continuation of these talks in late January in Istanbul, where we plan to discuss practical ideas and ways of cooperating towards the resolution of our core concerns about the nuclear issue.
The Irish government has detailed what's being called the harshest budget cuts on record to secure a bailout of Ireland's banking sector from the European Union and International Monetary Fund. The over $8 billion in cuts over the next 4 years include deep reductions to child benefits and public sector pensions. Irish Finance Minister Brian Lenihan said the austerity measures were necessary to rescue Ireland's banks.
The answer is we need their support to break the vicious cycle that has threatened our national finances and our banking system since the second quarter of this year. Following the Greek crisis this spring, funding for the state and for our banks became increasingly expensive. The rising costs of dealing with the banks that became evident during the autumn and the growing concerns about the prospects for the global economy reinforced doubts among international investors about the sustainability of our finances and our capacity to repair the financial system unaided.
The austerity measures are expected to receive enough backing in the Irish Parliament. Gerry Adams of the Sinn Féin party said his bloc would vote against the plan.
Féin TDs will be voting against this budget. It's obscene that the government, in order to fund the dig-out from the IMF and the EU, is going to visit savage cuts upon the most vulnerable people here.
Tens of thousands of Irish citizens have taken part in demonstrations against the austerity measures. On Tuesday, a crowd of several hundred gathered outside the Irish Parliament.
Fight this government against the lowest pay. They are cutting only the lowest of the lowest pay. They are scumdogs. They are cheats. They are cheats. Brian Lenihan, the worst finance minister in the whole of Europe.
Nigeria's anti-corruption agency has filed charges against former Vice President Dick Cheney in a $180 million bribery investigation involving Halliburton, the company he headed before taking office. Cheney, Halliburton Chief Executive David Lesar, and 6 others were indicted on 16 counts for the bribing of Nigerian officials to win a lucrative gas project during the time Cheney was CEO. Former Halliburton subsidiary KBR pleaded guilty in the U.S. last year to bribery charges in the case. A group of 7 Texas college students are on their 29th day of a hunger strike in support of the DREAM Act, a provision that would allow undocumented young people a chance at citizenship. Under the measure, immigrant youth could obtain permanent residency with a chance for citizenship, provided they attend college for at least 2 years or enlist in the military. The students have vowed to remain on a liquid-only diet until Congress approves the DREAM Act. The House and Senate could hold a vote as early as today. A recent Congressional Budget Office report found the DREAM Act would knock $1.4 billion off the federal deficit over the next decade. And Elizabeth Edwards, the wife of former Democratic Senator John Edwards, has died after a 6-year battle with cancer. Edwards was first diagnosed with breast cancer in the final weeks of the 2004 campaign as her husband ran as John Kerry's vice presidential nominee. After undergoing treatment, the cancer returned in 2007 and was deemed inoperable. Since then, Edwards was also forced to confront the public disclosure of her husband's infidelity and fathering a child with a campaign videographer. In a statement, President Obama called Elizabeth Edwards, quote, a tenacious advocate for fixing our healthcare system and fighting poverty. Our country has benefited from the voice she gave to the cause of building a society that lifts up all those left behind. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman, and we are broadcasting from Cancun, Mexico, the site of the UN climate change talks.